And you've found us. Welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And this week we have both. We're going to learn more about the initiative petition process.
Well, indeed. We have always, when you go into the ballot box or the ballot booth, rather, I hope you don't go into the ballot box, you have a bunch of initiatives perhaps to vote on, as well as perhaps a governor or attorney general, whatever the race may be. And we're going to be talking about those questions, those state questions that you have to vote on, how they come about, why we have them. It's interesting that we're one of only 23 states that have that procedure for for the people to be able to vote on an initiative matter at a general election. And we're going to be talking with two people who know most about this sort of thing to discuss why we have them and how they work.
And it's all coming up today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
A greener planet, cleaner air, a healthy economy, national security, a smaller deficit and a stronger dollar, green jobs, better jobs, energy independence, warmth and light and transportation. These are the reasons Chesapeake champions natural gas every day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guests.
Today we're really pleased to have two individuals that know an awful lot about the initiative matter that we're going to be talking about and ballots in general. To my right is the Honorable Susan Savage. She's the Secretary of State. She was appointed Secretary of State in 2003. Prior to that time, she served as mayor of the city of Tulsa for 10 years. As a matter of fact, in that capacity, she was the longest serving mayor in Tulsa history and the first woman to serve as mayor from Tulsa. She's been on the faculty of the University of Oklahoma School of Agriculture, Architecture, not agriculture, probably agriculture as well. This is her second visit to The Verdict, and we're really pleased to have you.
Thank you, Ken.
On my left is my partner, Amanda Maxfield-Green. She's an attorney with Crowe and Dunleavy. She has been for a number of years now. She's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma with honors, Phi Beta Kappa in letters. She did her law work at the University of Oklahoma and graduated with the highest honors as well. She's been a law clerk to the Honorable Robert Henry at the 10th Circuit. And at Crowe and Dunleavy, she's done a lot of interesting matters, including commercial litigation, but with some emphasis on initiative and referendum practice. And this is your first visit, Amanda. I'm sure glad to have you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
for coming
Thank
on
you,
the
Mayor.
show. Susan, tell us about the Office of Secretary of State. In general, if a person says, I'm not exactly sure what that happens at the state level, how would you explain it?
Secretary of State is really the repository for all official documents of the state, and that can be anything as simple as a resolution that is passed, just an honorary resolution by the legislature, to a proclamation by the governor, to all the laws, to limited liability companies, to agricultural liens, to notary filings. So we have our system, or our mechanical side of state government in the Secretary of State's office has been automated for a number of years, and we do a tremendous volume of business and really have some wonderful records. I mean, that's a whole different show, really, because I've had one of my staff members going through the archives in conjunction with the History Center, because we have historical documents that are part of Oklahoma's history that we're culling and providing to the History Center to digitize and to make available for researchers and other things. So really, that's the agency side, and then I serve as a cabinet official for the governor, and in that capacity work on everything from education policy to currently his lead on the Recovery Act for the state of Oklahoma, and first point of contact for international relations. So it's quite an interesting job, and Mayor, you would appreciate this. When you run a city, you find you can do a lot of things, and that's what I do as Secretary of State, a lot of different things.
A lot of different things.
So
a lot of different things come across your desk.
Right.
Now, with all of those different opportunities, it seems like you must have a large staff, yet I know better. I know you all are fairly lean.
We have
state
about
government.
35 people, and we are an agency that is lean and mean, I like to say, because most of the people there have been there quite some time, and because so many of the things that they do tie and are prescriptive, meaning they are tied directly to a legislative requirement. The agency side doesn't get too engaged in a lot of driving policy, but on the executive legislative area where we do the initiative petitions and the referendums, for example, the law is very basic, but we often get a lot of questions about interpretation, so we're very careful. We leave that to the attorneys or the Attorney General to do, because it can be confusing to a citizen.
Well, tell us a little bit about what your office does specifically in relation to initiative petitions and referendum petitions.
Well, as you well know, the state law provides for a process, or actually the state constitution provides for a process of direct government by the citizenry. If they feel as if their legislature fails or their government fails to address or redress their grievances, they can petition their government for change. And so the initiative process is spelled out and really is a process by which the Secretary of State reviews the initial request for a petition, and we do the mechanical side of it. We look at the language that is proposed in the petition, we provide some guidelines, and then we set the schedule for that petitioner, or the law does, but we say according to Monday morning at 11 o'clock, this is when your clock starts to gather your signatures. We advise the petitioner on the number of signatures, and then we have the responsibility of counting and reporting to the Supreme Court the outcome of that petition drive once those come in. Now, on the referendum side, it's a little bit different. There is a process by which the legislature can place on the ballot questions to amend the Constitution. They can also place on the ballot questions to change state law. But we're talking about the constitutional changes here today. Actually, 8 of the 9 state questions that are already on the ballot for 2010 have been put there by the legislature. Only 1 by the citizens. So it's a process that I've seen a lot of changes occur over the last 7 years in which I've been involved.
Amanda, you're on the private side of the initiative petition aspect. What does that entail?
That entails, there's 2 sides of the process, and I've had the opportunity to represent both sides of the initiative petition process. On the one side, you have the groups of people who would like to get a proposed law on the ballot. And
They want to change the law.
Right.
And so they come to an attorney.
Right.
And they say, help me with this process.
Right.
And what would you do?
You need to start with a piece of legislation that usually starts with the idea of whatever someone wants to do, whether it's education funding or anything else. And you take the idea and you need to draft a piece of legislation that would ultimately become a law of the state of Oklahoma. And that can be a constitutional amendment, it can be a legislative provision.
And that's separate from the ballot language. What you're talking about is the actual law as it would be. But so that's another step.
Correct. You have to draft the proposed law as it would appear in our statutes or our Constitution ultimately, and you have to draft what's called the ballot title, which is the information that appears on the ballot in front of the voter that lets them know what the law is about. They don't actually have to read the entire proposed law to vote. And so you have to draft both of those pieces of legislation, the piece of legislation and the ballot title.
Now, does a judge at any level look at both of these before the election, or you can't just place anything onto a ballot? I assume someone has to look at it and approve it.
Right, and there are separate processes for both of those things. Once the petition language has been filed with the Secretary of State publishes a notice in the newspaper. And any citizen can look at the law and challenge it for being legally insufficient. It may violate the Constitution is the typical legal challenge. And if that type of challenge is brought, the Supreme Court hears that challenge, and there are lawyers on both sides that argue the legal issues and brief the legal issues, and ultimately that determination is made by the Supreme Court. The ballot title has a slightly different process. The Attorney General has the responsibility of looking at the ballot title to see if it's sufficient. The Attorney General can propose a different ballot title. There's a point at which the Supreme Court could propose a different ballot title.
Is that typical? Does the Attorney General's office typically come up with some alternate
Yes,
or some
I would say
Yeah.
at least the initiative petitions I've seen, almost always they will simplify the language, clarify different points of the law. And one of the questions that has been debated in the legislature is whether or not you should have the ballot title reviewed before you have to go actually out to collect the signatures, so that if there's something invalid in the language, that can be determined up front. That's really that's a policy debate, and one side says, well, why should we, the state, be in the position of advising in advance of action that citizens might want to take before it really is a process that has been initiated? They're just collecting signatures and they have an idea right now. And so there's discussion about where that's appropriate to occur, what part of the process. And it's some of these discussions get highly technical.
I can imagine.
They're very mechanical, but they're also very based in law. And the Supreme Court, as Amanda was saying, does rule on the sufficiency not only of the ballot, but also of the petition count.
Let me jump in and get us to a break. We're discussing the initiative petition process. More on the verdict after this.
I remember walking into the academy and seeing the Highway Patrol core values, the professionalism, the courage, the bravery, integrity. And I realized that those are some of the same qualities that I was taught by my grandmother that the Chickasaw Nation valued in their people. We had received calls of heavy, heavy rain. I mean, it was the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my life. We had seen the white pickup truck with the two elderly people in it. There was no means of escape. And looking down at these people, you could see the terror in their eyes, and we knew we had to make a move or these people would probably die. And I reached down and grabbed their arm to help pull them up. I remember thinking, these people are gonna live, this is gonna work out. I appreciate this citation, but that's what we do. That's what we're expected to do. I'm glad that I was able to carry on that tradition of bravery and courage under strife.
In Oklahoma, with the technology that's being developed every day, it would be difficult to get much better than it is now, but I anticipate that it will.
Technology is always going to improve. It's always going to get better, and as it does, these fields will give up more and more of their natural resources.
I think with technology and the way they're doing it, it'll be a good, clean, environmental place, and I'm blessed to be here.
The oil and gas industry runs deep in our history and gives us a sense that we have a really strong future ahead of us.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're visiting with Secretary of State Susan Savage and Amanda Maxfield-Green. We're discussing referendums and initiative petitions and all sorts of elements to deal with those procedures. And Secretary of State Savage, what is a referendum and how does it differ from an initiative petition?
In just very basic terms, and you have the experts sitting here, but the initiative is truly a process by which the government is directly action by the government is directly initiated by the citizenry. A group of citizens come together, theoretically.
They say, I want to change the law.
I want to change the law. The referendum process, as far as a constitutional change, can be initiated by citizens, but it requires a resolution of the legislature to put the item on the ballot. The initiative process requires the citizenry to gather the signatures, and then it goes on the ballot.
I see. So but basically, the legislature can do it, or the citizens can do it, and there are criteria for each process.
Yes.
Let me ask you, Amanda, what is your take from a policy standpoint on whether or not the initiative process is actually really available to the people, considering two things. One, the number of signatures that are required to get on a ballot, and number two, the amount of money it costs to get the signatures and to advertise a ballot proposal prior to the election.
It is a difficult process for citizens to go through the entire process. As you mentioned, it's very expensive in the sense that you need almost 139,000 signatures right now to make a constitutional amendment.
For a statewide ballot.
For a statewide ballot.
Is that registered voters?
Registered voters of the state of Oklahoma. And to gather that number of signatures, typically people need to hire circulators that can spend days and weeks of their time.
Because they only have 90 days to do it.
Exactly. There's only 90 days to gather those signatures, and you need people who can dedicate days and weeks of their time to standing out and gathering those signatures. That's just a lot of signatures. I've never seen a petition that's been done solely by volunteers. Theoretically, if you had enough volunteers with enough time, you could do it. But everyone I've ever seen has had to hire circulators.
Has there ever been discussed that maybe we should do this on the internet and people should just go in and sign their name somehow? Is that futuristic, or do you see problems with that ever happening?
I think maybe years in the future when the verification process would be better. Right now, there's problems even with face-to-face signature that occurs with fraud.
Right,
in signatures.
and I would say, just to some of this discussion underway, one of the things that has happened over the last couple of years, really following the Tabor petition, which was my first experience with overt fraud. I saw it in the count that we had to do and reported what we observed and the discrepancies in the count and signatures, et cetera, to the Supreme Court. That said, it is difficult to get that many signatures, and there's some aspects of that being proposed for amendment. But I think what's been frustrating is it's being done in a very piecemeal approach. The governor asked me several months ago, and we've been working, in fact, have consulted with attorneys who work on petitions, coming up with an array of recommendations and problems within the existing law or inconsistencies. But it would appear that we're not going to have to move forward with any legislation this year, so there's some time to really do a very thorough job of it. But there was a law passed last year, for example, that impacts the timing for municipalities if they choose to do an initiative petition. That was not taken into account. So we have, both with the influx of technology, of outside money coming into the process, and with some of the issues around fraud, I think a need to look at the process and ensure that it retains its integrity for the citizenry.
Let me ask you both this question. You've indicated earlier today that as of now, and the legislature is by no means through, but as of now, if the general election were held, there'd be 9 issues for the people to vote on, aside from candidates, 9 policy issues to vote on. Let's assume that number doubles between now and the general election. Is that too many for the average voter to digest and comprehend? Can we overuse the process to the detriment of the voter?
I would never presume it's too much for a voter, because having run for elected office, as the mayor will know, voters are very discerning. But I do think it speaks to some problems in the process. If in fact the legislature decides to send everything to a vote of the people through the referendum process, then that raises some policy issues about whether or not the legislature is really preserving that process for the most significant policy issues. It certainly diminishes, from my perspective, the ability to have any meaningful discussion about the pros and the cons. You might have to raise private money to campaign for or against an issue, and if you have a statewide election underway or a presidential election underway, you really compete for the time. So there are many sides to that question, Kent, but I think we're becoming, as I've watched the numbers of questions go on the ballot over the last 7 years, it's being used with greater frequency to address, by the legislature, not really by the citizenry, but by the legislature, to address questions that seemingly they cannot address through the legislative process.
Yeah, let me address the citizenry aspect of it to Amanda. Is that process really available to the average citizen statewide?
I believe that the process is available.
Yeah.
You know, everything you need to do to bring an initiative petition is pretty well spelled out in the Oklahoma statutes. And I don't think you have to be a lawyer to go through and read that procedure and understand it. I would always advise that you get a lawyer to help you take you through the process, but I do think the citizenry can understand it and utilize the procedure. As we were talking about earlier, the cost to do it can be prohibitive. The number of people you need to drive your signature challenge can be prohibitive. If you get a legal challenge, if you get a signature challenge, those would necessitate hiring lawyers. I think that it's not as accessible as it could be.
Well, the average citizen doesn't have the several $1 million.
Right.
No, the average citizen doesn't have the several $1 million and the determination to bring about that kind of change. It's going to have to be brought about by a group and a well-funded group.
There's some interesting issues that have arisen in the last couple of years on the part of people being requested to sign an initiative petition. We get calls in our office saying, well, somebody approached me to sign a petition and they told me it was about this, and later I found out it was about that, and I'd like my name taken off the petition. There's no mechanism through which to do that. People are concerned about identity theft, so they're less inclined to give you their name and address. They may have just moved here and give you a different address, then they may change their address by the time that they get ready to vote. So cross-referencing with the state election board voter registration files and those who sign a petition is really not a good tool right now with the kind of with the names or the information that's required on an initiative petition. So I think we have to determine, does the process still meet the needs of the citizenry, and if not, then where could we make some changes to apply technology to ensure the integrity of it, to make it more accessible, and to accomplish what at least the founders of our Constitution wanted.
Yeah. Last 30 seconds, what changes would you like to see made?
I think there could be some changes to the length of the time that signatures can be gathered. The 90-day period is fairly short. It's one of the shortest in the country. It absolutely can be done within 90 days. I've definitely seen it done, and I've seen it done faster than 90 days. But lengthening that time frame slightly would give people more time, would maybe give a group of just volunteers the time to gather those
Might
signatures.
make it less expensive and therefore more accessible.
Absolutely.
We're going to have to make that the final word. Amanda Maxfield-Green, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Secretary of State Savage, thanks again as always.
Anybody wants to go to our website and read what's on the ballot currently, they can see the ballot titles.
Great. We'll give that website information on the other side of this break. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Kent and I'll
much.
have a final word after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love. but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We're wrapping up a show which we visited with Susan Savage and Amanda Maxfield-Green on the Office of the Secretary of State, but also the initiative petition process.
It's a process that the founders of our Constitution here in Oklahoma thought was very important, and we were one of the very first states, believe it or not, to have it. There weren't very many states west of the Mississippi at all that had it, and after we enacted it, a lot followed suit. Interesting. It affects a lot of our legislative input, and I appreciate our guest today.
Well, it can have far-reaching effects on life in Oklahoma, obviously to change the law, and it's also a very nice form of direct democracy. We have a couple of websites that we want to draw your attention to. First of all, you can get in touch with the Secretary of State's office at sos.ok.gov. Or if you'd like to go to our website and tell us about a show or a topic you'd like to see discussed on The Verdict, do so. It's called theverdict.tv, theverdict.tv. Kent and I'll be back next week with another show, and we'll see you then.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.